all know education keeps changing, right? There's this constant search for better ways to learn, to really absorb information so it sticks, beyond just cramming for a test. But let's be real, how much of what you read or hear actually makes that jump from the page into being usable knowledge in your brain?
That gap
Yeah.
between just seeing information and truly getting it, integrating it, that's a huge challenge. Traditional methods, well, they often struggle there. Information overload is real, but actual understanding, that's much harder to pin down.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly to the material for this deep dive. We've got an article here proposing a genuinely different way to handle knowledge transfer. So our mission today, to dive into this source, unpack these concepts of learnography and something called Brainpage Books. We really want to figure out how they claim to, well, revolutionize how knowledge moves from, say, a book directly into your brain. And the key seems to be tapping into the brain's own, natural ways of learning.
Okay, let's get into this article. It definitely positions itself as describing a pretty fundamental shift, moving away from the classic textbook model we all, grew up with. It talks about a paradigm shift, specifically with these Brainpage books operating inside a bigger framework they call Learnography.
A paradigm shift. That sounds, well, significant. So what's the core difference here compared to, I don't know, the textbooks gathering dust on my shelf?
Well, the main claim is that Brainpage books are specifically designed to match with the brain's own learning mechanisms much more effectively. It's not just about dumping information out there. It's about structuring it so the brain can process it efficiently. And, the article suggests, maybe even enjoyably. Basically, working with the brain, not just at it.
Okay, intriguing. So how does it supposedly do that? What's the theory driving this whole thing?
Right, that brings us to the core principle the article lays out, the Brainpage theory of knowledge transfer. The whole theory is built on this idea that knowledge sinks in better when it's delivered and processed in a way that lines up with how the brain naturally works. It argues learning isn't just, collecting facts. It's about building a deeper understanding, something that actually becomes part of your cognitive structure.
Integrated into your cognitive structure.
Yeah.
Okay, so not just facts floating around, but building something solid inside your head. The article mentions specific brain aspects this theory engages with. What are those?
Yeah, it gets quite specific, actually. It talks about using mathematical dimensions in the learning process, activating motor circuits when transferring knowledge, and also leveraging the brain's natural ability to perceive and sort information about space, objects, time, instances, and modules.
Wow, okay. That sounds like it's trying to hit multiple levels of brain function. You've got physical action with motor circuits, maybe abstract stuff with math dimensions, and then how we categorize the world, space, objects, time. It suggests a much more active, kind of multi-dimensional way to engage with the material. Now, this theory isn't just applied through one kind of book, is it? The article mentions several types of Brainpage books.
Correct. It's a whole system. Different types of books, each with a specific job. First one is the Spectrum book.
Ah, yes, the article calls this the mother book. What's its main role in this whole system?
Think of it as the foundation, the vocabulary and concepts book. Its job is basically collecting key topics and defining them. The article says it uses object language and object definitions as the fundamental building blocks for knowledge transfer in learnography.
Object language, what does that actually mean here?
Well, the idea seems to be treating concepts themselves as distinct objects that need really clear definitions. The Spectrum book provides those, and the article suggests that processing this spectrum of object definitions happens in the brain's association areas, the parts connecting different bits of info. It's about laying that basic groundwork.
Got it. So the mother book sets the stage, defines the key ideas as objects. What about the father book then?
Right, that would be the matrix book. Its job is all about dealing with a matrix of practical applications. So tasks, projects, problems, questions, all related to the concepts from the Spectrum book.
Okay, so if the Spectrum book gives you the what, the matrix book gives you the what to do with it.
Precisely, yeah. It helps organize and visualize complex information about these tasks. Often uses matrix structures, which makes sense, to show relationships. The article calls it the book of tasks that students have to learn, solve, and practice. It's where you actually apply the concepts.
Building blocks from Spectrum, practical tasks from matrix. Okay, what's next in the lineup?
Then you have the source book. These are presented as the deeper dives into specific topics, repositories of more detailed information.
Sort of like individual subject chapters, but maybe more in depth than just basic definitions.
Exactly. They cover subject chapters from a syllabus, yeah. But the article really focuses on how they help knowledge move from the source page to your recipient brain. The emphasis is on how learning something in one context can then be applied somewhere else. And this book is apparently quite structured. The article says it's split into 5 sections, each representing a different dimension of knowledge transfer.
5 dimensions. That implies a pretty layered understanding is being built here. This is getting interesting. Now, the Zeid book, that one sounds quite different from the others just from the name.
It really is. The Zeid book seems to be where the heavy lifting happens, analysis, synthesis, critical thinking. Physically, the article just describes it as a notebook of paper. But the key activity is writing what it calls a Zeid page of transformed motor knowledge.
Transformed motor knowledge. And it's just a paper notebook. Where's the motor connection?
So the process involves the actual physical act of writing by hand. The article connects this to using, let me get this right, compartments of the brachial plexus of hand and finger mapping to develop something called pencil power. Now, the exact biology might be complex, but the core idea seems to be that the physical effort, the fine motor skill of writing, that's integral to actually processing and transforming the knowledge.
Pencil power. I like that. So the physical act of writing is key. How does the article connect that back to the brain?
Well, the process of making a brain page, which seems to be their term for the act of learning happening in the brain, is described as physically changing the brain. It talks about opening or trimming of synapses, basically neuroplasticity, right? Forming and strengthening connections. It calls this brain page plasticity. And this is how the article claims you produce working brain power. There's a really potent line summarizing it. Practice, write, Zeid page. It drives home that this active work analyzing, synthesizing through writing is what builds those strong cognitive structures.
Practice writes Zeid page.
Huh. That really hammers home the value of active work versus just, passively reading something. Okay, last one. The miniature book. What's its role?
This one's tied to a specific classroom setup described in the article. Imagine a classroom divided into 7 miniature schools, supposedly for more personalized learning. The miniature book's job is simply to record the activities going on within those small groups.
So it's basically the logbook for this specific kind of structured group learning, like meeting minutes.
Exactly. Seems like it. The process involves a task moderator. Sounds like the main teacher guiding students. This big teacher, as they call him, writes the records in the miniature book. And then there's a phase superior who helps the teacher and keeps these records, probably for the principal or some kind of oversight.
Okay, wow. So spectrum for concepts, matrix for tasks, source for depth, Zeid for active synthesis via writing, and miniature for group activity logs. How does using this whole system, all these Brainpage books, supposedly boost knowledge transfer compared to, just reading a regular textbook?
Well, the central claim is that these books enable a more direct transfer. Knowledge goes directly into relevant brain regions because the information is presented in formats that supposedly align with how the brain naturally processes and organizes things. The idea is they help learners build what the article calls structured brain page modules.
Brain page modules, what are we picturing there? Like little mental folders?
Kind of. The article describes them as cognitive templates. So yeah, imagine building organized structures or frameworks in your brain. Frameworks specifically designed for storing, organizing, and then easily recalling and applying information. The theory is having these well-structured templates makes accessing knowledge faster, more reliable, whether it's for an exam or, a real-world problem.
So it's not just chucking facts into a messy mental closet. It's like building well-organized filing cabinets in your brain.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. And the article stresses this approach aligns with brain plasticity, the brain's ability to physically change. It really emphasizes active engagement, especially with that Zeid book, over just passively receiving information. And because knowledge is supposedly getting organized into these modules more efficiently, the claim is learners need less time on, say, extensive note-taking or just rote memorization.
Right, which ties back to that idea of efficiency, maybe even making learning more enjoyable that we talked about earlier.
Right. And another benefit they claim is less anxiety or fear, particularly around exams. I mean, if you feel like you have these solid, accessible cognitive templates built up, you'd naturally feel more confident, wouldn't you?
Makes sense. And the focus on the Zeid book, that implies it's actively trying to foster critical thinking.
Absolutely. The formats, especially the Zeid book, seem designed to push you beyond just absorbing info into actively analyzing and synthesizing it. It really reframes the learner's role. You're not just a receiver. You're actively building and structuring your own understanding inside your brain.
That shift to being an active participant feels really central.
Okay, let's quickly just list out the main benefits for the learner that the article specifically mentions.
Sure, based on this source, the explicit benefits they highlight are active learning, which leads to deeper understanding, improved retention, so the knowledge sticks better, reduced anxiety or fear, boosting confidence, especially for tests, critical thinking, encouraged by the analysis and synthesis work, and brain page development. That's the creation of those structured cognitive templates we talked about. It certainly paints a compelling picture. Maybe even, yeah, revolutionary. A vision for education that tries to reshape how we learn by designing tools that work directly with the brain's own processes.
Yeah, what's particularly fascinating, I think, is this idea that how you interact with different kinds of information, different book formats, could physically influence your brain structure,
Yeah.
creating these specific brain page modules.
Yeah, that concept,
Mhm.
knowledge moving directly from the page to influence specific brain areas. It's pretty powerful stuff to think about. And that phrase, practice right Zeid page, kind of sticks with you, doesn't it? It really makes you reflect on your own learning habits. How much of our learning is truly active transformation, like physically or mentally building something versus just passive consumption?
Which leads to a question for you listening right now. When you think about how you learn, how you try to master things, how do your habits line up with these kinds of brain-centric ideas? Or how do they differ? And what does that idea, writing Zeid page, that active practice, fundamentally shapes your understanding? What does that mean for truly mastering something you really care about?